Thank you so much for joining us, Marisca. Tell us, who are you? Where are you from and where are you based now?
Thank you for your time, Joe. So my name is Marisca Purcell. I am currently in Singapore. I'm originally from South Africa, and this is my second expat stint with my husband, Travis.
Where was your first one?
East Africa. We lived between Uganda and Kenya for 6 months, 2 weeks at a time.
Oh, geez. So like you were as a family doing fly in, fly out?
Yes, at that stage, it was only me and Travis, and we basically had 2 suitcases. One stayed in each of the countries, and we had our carry-on luggage, which we traveled in between the 2 different countries with.
Wow, there you go. That is an expat experience. So were you running a house in both places? So you had a fridge and food and things in both places and you'd come and go?
Yeah, so we actually had arranged with an Airbnb. We contacted the owners and said, we can't guarantee the whole month that we're going to be there because we had additional travel in between. So we had a house in one place, which we rented for 2 weeks in a month. And then the next 2 weeks we were in the other country, and we've also asked them if we could store some things at each of the places. Simple things like spices. I mean, you don't want to be traveling with spices in between 2 different countries, but you do need your spices. So we would just leave a bag with like the groundskeeper or the housekeeper for 2 weeks, and then travel back and forth.
My goodness. So what year was this that you were doing this?
This was in 2018 up until April of 2019, before we went back to South Africa to give birth to our eldest child.
Oh my goodness. So you were doing this FIFO, the fly in, fly out, and jumping around between 2 countries while you were pregnant.
Yes, and it was quite the interesting experience because in these third world countries where there's no real access to water, electricity, a reliable source of clean and healthy food, healthy maybe, but not always, it's a bit debatable where it comes from. So, and it was extremely hot. It was during the summer months. So it was quite the experience getting on the back of what they call bodas. It's like motorbikes while I'm pregnant, sitting sideways because I can't lift my leg up high enough to get over the motorbike anymore, and not having power for 12 hours a day, and going to the fresh market for food and then soaking these things in basically 50% bleach to make sure that you're not contaminating yourself and getting food poisoning. But yeah, I was pregnant during all of the 6 months we were there, and it was brutal, to be honest.
Wow, fascinating. So were you working?
I was not working. My husband was seconded as the general manager for 2 franchise partners up there, and that's why we were traveling between the 2 different countries. I did take up a role of just assisting him with the basic things, day-to-day activities and day-to-day admin things that he did not have access to anymore. He had no one to plan his diary. He had no one to visit stores if he needed something urgently. So I became his go-to person, personal assistant and advisor all in one.
Were you getting a paycheck on a regular basis for this role?
Paid in other ways. Like I said, I was pregnant at that stage and it was extremely hot. So I would make him get up in the middle of the night, getting me ice waters and everything else, cold water bath he would have to run for me. It's like, this is your job. And he's like, how? I'm like, I'm doing a lot. I'm growing a baby. You can do this for me. It's for the baby.
Oh, that's always such a good lever to pull, that one. Well done. Well played.
I wish I was pregnant again.
Oh, how funny. Oh, goodness. So I guess then going from that stint, how long did you have in South Africa before the move to Singapore?
We were there for 4 months. Well, actually 2.5, and then we had our scoping trip to Singapore for 2 weeks or 10 days, and then we went back to South Africa, and we were there for 6 weeks, in which we had to just organize everything, the move, and we arrived here in late July 2019.
So you managed to sneak in 6 or 7 months pre-COVID.
Yes, not long enough. And everybody was like, oh, you should go explore Southeast Asia. It's so accessible, it's affordable. And we're like, no, please, we just moved to Singapore. Like, can we just get familiar with our own environment before we start exploring? And then COVID hit, and we're like, oh, yeah, I should have listened.
So how old was the baby when you arrived in Singapore?
Our daughter is the eldest. She was 4.5 months.
I see. So how did you find arriving? Was obviously a little less travel involved than your East Africa experience, but how did you find getting settled in when you arrived over here?
I think we were both very excited to finally have less travel involved with my husband's job. Little did we know that he would start traveling soon after. But Singapore has always been a long-term plan for us. We said we're not just going to come for the standard 2 years. We want to be here, at least 10 years. So I think we were both just finally having the opportunity to settle down and build a lifestyle, build a community of friends, build a network where we can really connect with people and feel like we belong in some sort of community before we move on.
And have you found that that's been the case? Have you been able to do that?
Yes, so far we've made some great friends and friendships which will last longer than just any Singapore stint. Friends are so fluent here. They are fluid, should I rather say. They just move in and out, and we've built some really strong connections with people. And I think also for my husband, that's really important because he's from Australia. He moved to Africa where we met. So he's been there for 5 years. So he's got an idea of what it is to move to a new country, having to rebuild social networks and a community and a supporting network. So for us as a family with a newborn at that stage, or very small baby at that stage, it was really important to find people who we could rely on when things got tough.
Without having that family support anywhere nearby.
It's quite interesting how you actually just rely on essentially complete strangers to take care of your kids and raise them, and it's quite a resilient. I always think of expat families, expat moms, expat dads, whoever is the trailing spouse, that they have to be quite resilient, because where you would ask your mum or your sister or whoever to just have the kids for half an hour while you go do your hair, or I really need to rush off an hour away, the kids are at school, can you pick them up? And it's now essentially you're asking your neighbor, and you're like, I don't really know them, but I've got no other option. And
and I think that that's a really interesting point to make, that your friendships, I feel, get very serious very quickly. Like it's sort of almost like like teenage crushes, where it's like really heavy and hard and fast at the start, and you guys become really good friends very quickly because you're leaning on each other. I think that's a really beautiful thing.
That's also why your connections, I think, will last longer than Singapore, because you just you share so much in such a short time, and you learn to deal with different parenting styles and raising different kids from different backgrounds according to their values, but it's in your house, and it's quite the mixture of personalities and skill sets, actually.
Yeah, for sure. So tell me, in those early days, like, how were you building those friendship groups? Like, how were you meeting people? How were you building that network?
the first thing I did was, and this is like a thing anywhere we ever travel to that I try to look up, is look for other South Africans in that country. One, we have a really strong sport culture. So whenever there's a rugby or cricket game, I know that I would meet somebody there who might not be my best friend, but at least can relate to something and give me some tips on where to start. My biggest thing moving here was, what is the cost of a bread, like a loaf of bread? Do I pay $2 for it? Do I pay $13 for it? I would pay, I think when I just arrived, I paid something like $17 for this artisanal sourdough something, and I was like, oh, that's the going price. And crazy. The only thing I've ever known was like, this is Singapore is a very expensive city to live in, so I thought that was the going rate, and people were like, no, don't be silly. So it was quite fun to meet other South Africans who could say, you know what, if you really want sourdough, this is where you go. If you want to have your groceries delivered, these are the platforms that you use, just as a starting point. And you know, as guys, I've met some really good South African friends in that group, and from there, through mutual friends, just connected to more people. And I've also volunteered in different charities. So there's a specific one where we deliver food parcels to those less privileged in Singapore, and I've made some really good connections with like-minded people, trailing spouses who aren't working, who has a bit of free time but still have a passion for, you know, community work and outreach programs. So I've met some really good friends and
branched out from the South African crowd.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's always the trap though, isn't it? When you sometimes think that you lean into country specific networks and things, and then sometimes you find like, oh goodness, I've moved to another country, and literally, like, say for me as an example, that I joined one of the Australian organisations and then only hang out with Australians. So there's that pushing yourself outside the boundaries once you've got your groove to start reaching out. Tell me, as far as your volunteering stuff, how did you sort of get involved? I've sort of talked to people over different sort of conversations that some people have found it really quite easy to volunteer and to find places to actually lend a hand, and then others have found it a lot more challenging to actually find charities that are interested in having them come along.
So for me, I selected a project that I'm passionate about. I mean, I'm from Africa where food security is a real issue. So that was my driving force behind selecting the specific charity that I want to work for. So I'm working for volunteering at a food bank. It was quite easy because they need manpower. They actually need labor to go and do the physical work, pack the packages, make the trips, deliver, walk from door to door and say, hi, how are you? This is for you. And there is a selection program. It's not for everybody, because you can't send somebody into an elderly person's home and just say, oh, here's your stuff, drop it off and walk away. You have to be able to read the room and see if that person wants to talk, have a listening ear, spend some time with them, because it's not just about delivering food, but it's making them feel like worthy. It's making them feel like they have someone to talk to. I believe like the elder isolation is real in every country, and sometimes all they just want to do is talk to someone. So it's more than just a food delivery service as such. With regards to other charities, I mean, it's difficult because, yes, everybody wants to go cuddle the cute puppies. At one stage, they have to say, whoa, there's enough people, it's too much. But if you select something that you're really passionate about and you're consistent in your volunteering, then it's quite easy for them to say, hey, this is a reliable person. If ever we need someone, let's call them up and ask them for help.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think like in order to get longevity out of volunteering, you're right, it's got to be something that you're actually really interested in and passionate about, because otherwise it becomes pretty old pretty quickly.
Yeah, and especially with doing physical work. I mean, we've seen people come and go. They're there one time and then like, gee, this is hard work, or ew, I'm so sweaty. I'm not going to do this again. I'd rather want to go cuddle the puppies. And I'm like, this is, you're not here for the right reasons. Like you have to have a passion for it and not just to tick a box of some sort. But what was quite interesting about moving back to arriving into Singapore was how we built a community at where we stayed. Our first residence, we were in a serviced apartment where we didn't really know anybody. We met, we went to one of the South Africans in Singapore event, and then we decided where we want to live. And the facilities of the apartment was fantastic. There was a pool, entertainment area, was a beautiful 4-bedroom place with 3 balconies, wrapping like corner unit. It was so good, but there was no feel of or sense of community. We knew our neighbors, one set of neighbors on the left of us, and that's just because we frequently went up the lift to the same floor. And then we had people downstairs with a child around the same age as our daughter. And that was it. And recently we've moved to a new apartment with a much bigger community, with a lot more kids, a lot more expats. And we found like that's where we've created a lot of strong friendships and good friendship, people with the same mindset as us. So that was quite important for me, is like to live in a place where I feel I have people in my direct vicinity that I can rely on.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think that seems to be a bit of a running theme through the conversations that I've been having with people, is that quite often it's the luck of where you end up paying a lease, and that you happen to have a good crowd in your condo or in your apartment block, that you actually get to build a really good crowd there. I've also met people that have had to just almost swallow the rent increases because they can't bear the thought of moving somewhere else away from their friends.
I think that's us in a few months. That's us.
Well, hopefully your landlord doesn't listen to this and then say, right, these suckers are ripe for the doubling of rent.
Not that we're willing to pay double, but yeah, let's hope that being long-term renters plays in our favor.
Yeah. Now, tell me, are you working in Singapore? What are you doing with yourself on a sort of day-to-day these days?
Currently, I'm not working. I am actively looking for a job. I said 2023 will be the year where I rejoin the workforce. So apart from the birth of my daughter in 2019, we've also had a son in 2021, and he's turning 2 very soon. And that will mean that I have a lot more free time and I'm ready to get back into the workforce. I've taken the break to have the kids, and we're now in a position where I feel like I need to be stimulated either academically or, just having different conversations with people.
So have you got the capacity to work? Do you have the visas and things that you are on? Like what's your visa situation as far as you actually engaging in the workforce here?
I'm currently on a dependence pass, which does not allow me to work in Singapore. Once all the changes have come about with the new One Pass that they have implemented in Singapore, my husband will then move over to a One Pass, and I will be able to get a letter of consent, what they call here, to work, hopefully.
Otherwise, you would have had to sort of gone down a sponsorship route as far as getting someone to sponsor you to work?
Yes, essentially, I would have to apply for a role in Singapore, get my own employment pass, qualify for all the things that they require, and then, start a job in that way, but that's also become quite difficult because if I go onto an EP with my husband's job and the kids who are on dependence passes, we would then have to decide where do the kids go and whose dependence pass and whose medical aid do they get and where do we stand on those kind of things. So it's not just straightforward. There's a lot of admin behind everything.
Yeah, of course, admin. So tell me, what's your background? What do you do work-wise in a past previous pre-kid life?
Pre-kid life, I worked in a cardiothoracic surgery department as a scientist. I have a master's degree in chemistry, and we were developing pericardial patches to re-implant into humans, you know, as a alternative to just using how do I say this?
In layman's terms, please.
Yes,
for us mere mortals.
Oh, excuse you, you peasant.
I see. So it was pretty stimulating work-wise.
Yes. So I used to develop like on the chemical side of things. We would test the products inside humans, and we were working with an engineering company to 3D print heart valves for heart valve transplants. And I would do all the, you know, chemical testing and strength testing of those patches and valves, essentially. And we had animal, what do you call them, projects, so animal studies going on and using different materials, seeing if you strip. So basically, if you strip the tissue right down to only the bare essentials where there's no more animal cells on these structures, and you recellularize them with human cells, how well will it take in the human body? What's the rejection rate? Will it be rejected? Is there physical differences? And yeah, it was quite a very interesting study to do.
Cool. Thanks for explaining that for us mere mortals. So question, how have you found not working? How's the I suppose the day-to-day headspace for someone that has done what sounds to be pretty hardcore, interesting, stimulating work to kids?
At first, it was very liberating because I had the freedom to not be bound by, you know, procedures starting 5 a.m. in the morning or prepping or working on weekends. If someone got sick or there's a problem with the animal study, you have to rush and you're 24/7 on call. So with having the kids, I took a break. It was really good for the first year and after each of my children's births. And then it became a bit of a boring sitting at home because your kid is now not so dependent on you anymore. They're able to feed properly. You don't have to watch them all the time. And also now they comprehend more things. They're able to go to school, socially interact. It's becoming boring at home, just doing kids stuff all the time. Like, I have a passion for science, but that passion is not being stimulated at the moment. So it's quite tough.
So talk me through, what does a week, a day in the week, or what does a week look like for you at this stage?
I'm trying to keep myself busy with different things. So after dropping kids off in the morning, I would either just go have a quick coffee, do all the admin, send out either emails or my CV to different companies, just cold emailing them, say, hey, this is my skill set. If you hear of anything or if you have this position available, please contact me. And I would do some exercise just to try and release some of that stress and get active, because it's very easy to just sit at home and binge watch Netflix if you've got nothing to do. You know, the more you have to do, the more you will do, kind of thing. So I try and every day get some sort of exercise in. And I've taken the task of doing all the shopping for the really bulky things which we get delivered, doing all the shopping myself. And I'm actually quite happy with how I've built connections with the local people. So I go to a fresh market where I support the local vendors, and I've built connections with them. And every morning there's a specific store that I think about. I go there and I buy one orange and the lady cuts it up for me. And, that's kind of my market breakfast that I have. And the chicken uncle always knows that I get fresh chicken breast with no bones. And it's quite quirky to see how you can build relationships by something as simple as supporting local businesses as well. Yeah, and then in the afternoons after kids come home, we play, we swim 3-4 times a week, being where it's so hot all the time. And then I try to engage my children, not doing nothing but learning a skill every day. So whether they're with me learning about the ingredients that I bought at the market, helping me cook the food, helping me talk about where the food comes from. I try and engage them in deeper conversations than just this is the food. I try and make them aware. I think once again, because food is my passion, and coming from a country where a lot of people don't have enough food, I want to make sure that my children appreciate where it comes from. So I try and engage them in some activity to do either with food, or when we play, we talk about where did these toys come from and where will they end up when we stop playing with them. And then it's bedtime and bath and bedtime for them. Yeah.
And then it repeats.
And it repeats every day, and it never stops.
Yes. I wonder, what do you think, if you sort of could give advice to trailing spouses that might be starting out or at the beginning of their experience, what would be some things that you wish that you'd known, or that some advice that you wish you'd sort of had earlier on?
One, don't pay $17 for sourdough. It's ridiculous, no matter how special it is. Find your network as quick as possible, and not necessarily, you don't have to find a best friend, but find a starting point. Find people who can relate to your background, who has something in common with you, who has the same passion as you. Find someone who you can rely on early on, so that you can build a network, but that also so that you can feel that you're not isolated in the new country. That's the biggest advice. And 2 is engage with the locals. They have a wealth of knowledge that are sometimes not explored by expats, because they feel either we can't relate to the culture because we weren't born here, or we weren't raised here. But when you do engage with them, they're quite sweet, and they open up and they teach you a lot about the country.
Did you have that sort of experience when you were in East Africa between the two countries? Did you find that you were engaging more with locals because you were so transient back and forth, or were you making sort of other expat friends or things? Like, what did your social sort of scene look like in those 6 months?
I was engaging with the locals because they were like the constant people there, the groundskeeper, the housekeepers from wherever we stayed, the local markets that we engaged with. There were expats that we saw and said hi to, but we also knew that we couldn't really build meaningful relationships with them because it was 2 weeks and then we would be gone. And after a month, when we come back, they've been gone or they've been traveling, or, so we took that time to really focus on our marriage and just ourselves, because we knew we were pregnant with our daughter. So building a strong foundation for our marriage, regardless of where we are, was key for us during that time. And then we started engaging in different things with the locals and seeing that, if you become, or if you immerse yourself to the culture, then it becomes a lot easier as well.
Any like final bits of hot tip advice that you would give?
Yes, don't pay $17 for a sourdough.
Like you're slightly traumatized by the bread
I
pricing.
think as a trailing spouse, you know, we tend to take things very serious because we know that we don't work here, we only live here. You don't know how long you're going to be here for. There's always the stress, like, are we saving enough money? Are our kids being raised? Do they have good friends? Are we going to the right places? Are we hanging out with the right people? How do I raise my kid not becoming entitled? You have all these fears, and there's a lot of stress as a trailing spouse because you know that wherever you end up next, you have to kind of already prepare for that now. And you don't know where you're going to end up anyway. So for us, it's, you know, sorry. So just as a final note, it's quite important. Hi, this is my daughter who have joined us. As a final note, you know, it's so important for you as a trailing spouse to prepare your whole family for where you're going to end up next. And because you don't know where you're going to end up next, it's becoming quite stressful. So have some fun, you know, in the country, make friends that you can go out with, find a passion project, find something silly to do, and really don't stress the big things in,
I think you make, like, it's an interesting thing that stress that trailing spouses often feel is that, you know, it's that, like, how secure is this job? How long are we staying here? Is this visa so dependent on what we're doing that, like, you are almost at this state of hypervigilance a lot of the time, that it's sort of, I don't know. I agree that it can be relatively stressful. So I think that that's really good advice, that finding fun things to do.
Yeah.
Marisca, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for your time, Joe. Have a good day.
Where have I gone?